If a Jain says that I am Hindu, be my guest. I am no, मैं यहाँ ठेकेदार थोड़ी बैठा हूँ या तुम थोड़ी ठेकेदार बैठे हो किसी को बोलने का तुम हिंदू हो या नहीं हो.
You'd agree to this fact कि this किसी एक faith का separate religion अपने आप को establish करना is in some ways a politicization of faith.
Faith को religion बनाना, whether it is Hindu or not.
और एक philosophical system है, हिंदू है, सनातन.
हाँ, these are all things that we are looking at through an alien lens. We are not a ritualized society anymore. If we were a ritualized society, we would know who we are. I would know you, you would know me much better than we'd know each other right now.
Onus भी किसका है? Responsibility किसकी?
Onus तो समाज का है. जब आपकी सांस लेने को सही हवा नहीं मिल रही, आपकी सॉइल में पॉइजन है, तो फिर ये सामाजिक झगड़े जो हैं वो थोड़ा छोटे लगने लगते हैं. मुस्लिम्स का देखो धर्म नहीं है. इस्लाम इज अ वे ऑफ waging war. For Kashmiri Pandit, from day one, Mr. Modi has largely ignored. ये मीरपुरी हैं, ये वो हैं, ये इन सब से हमारा नाता है. But he actually did not mention Kashmiri Pandits.
बदलाव लाने का काम समाज करेगा या स्टेट करेगा?
People now on Twitter advise me about how I should think about Kashmir. It's like saying that I should tell you about what it means to be a Jat. 70 साल अगर आपने काशी को गंदी नाली बना दिया, तो ये पूछना कि यार ये मंदिर क्यों तोड़ दिया, सिर्फ ये पूछना एंटी नेशनल हो गया है. मूर्तियों को उखाड़ने के लिए लोकल मजदूर नहीं मिला तो आपको मालदा से मुसलमान मजदूर बुलाने पड़े. तो ये चीज अगर आप पॉइंट आउट करोगे तो आप एंटी नेशनल हो.
राम राम दोस्तों, नमस्कार. आई एम ग्लैड टू बी जॉइंड टुडे बाय अ डियर फ्रेंड आशीष धर जी. आशीष जी आई हैव नोन हिम फ्रॉम फॉर इयर्स नाउ. एंड बस मुद्दा ये रहता है कि आशीष भाई के साथ डिस्कशन करनी हो और इट सीम्स के इसको सीरियस रखना है. बट क्योंकि कॉन्वर्सेशन के अंदर कई ऐसे टॉपिक्स हैं जो वी बीन चैटिंग अबाउट ओवर द इयर्स. आई नोन योर पर्सपेक्टिव्स एंड बट वील डेल्व डीपर इनटू अंडरस्टैंडिंग कि उसके प्रोज और कॉन्स क्या हैं. एंड कोशिश करेंगे कि थोड़ा सा सीरियस है.
हाँ बिल्कुल.
वो तो मैंने देखा है,
पूरी कमिटमेंट है मेरी.
मेरे आई रिमेम्बर मैंने कुछ एक वीडियोस देखे जिसके अंदर ना मैं आई एम लुकिंग एट यू एकदम सीरियसली बोलते हूँ. मैंने कहा क्या मतलब ये क्यों, व्हाई इज इवन ट्राइंग. जैसे लास्ट टाइम वो इंद्रप्रस्थ कल्चरल फेस्टिवल वाला वीडियो मैंने भेजा था ना आपको, मेरे को ऐसे एकदम पास में ऐसे ये तो कैप्टन व्योम के ग्लासेस पे. तो आज भाई लेट्स फर्स्ट डिस्कस कश्मीर बिकॉज दैट्स वन टॉपिक जिस मुद्दे पर मैं आपको जितने सालों से, मैं ओवर क्लोज टू अ डेकेड नाउ जब ये कॉन्वर्सेशंस हो रही हैं दैट आई हैव बीन लर्निंग फ्रॉम योर पर्सपेक्टिव्स. कश्मीर के मुद्दे पर बिफोर वी जंप इनटू KP challenges in the 1980s and 1990s. Give us a brief history about Kashmir, its importance in Hindu civilization, its relevance, and when did it start facing challenges? क्योंकि ये बात भी हमने कई बार डिस्कस की है ना. At the end of the day, the Kashmir debate is less of a political debate, but perhaps more of a civilizational debate.
Right.
And मुद्दा वो वहीं पर आकर आगे पीछे उससे ज़्यादा है नहीं. It's not an India versus Pakistan. It's Kashmir is Hindu versus Muslim problem.
Yeah.
And that you've argued over the years. So give us a brief history about establishing it and then we get on with it.
First of all, I'm very thankful.
Are you kidding me?
And I'm so happy to see the setup, this beautiful studio that you've set up, and we've been talking for years. And कितनी बार तुम ऑफिस भी आते थे, and we used to talk about कि मीडिया में कैसे करना है, क्या करना है. Finally, I'm seeing all this, and I'm really happy.
Thank you.
So kudos to that.
Thank you.
About Kashmir, yeah, of course. I mean, I've been speaking about it for a long time. And I have always stressed on this fact that this is not really a political problem. It is not a problem of economics, but it is a civilizational problem. And like I've clarified before also, that civilizational means that it is a problem of, it is a problem that transcends the daily transactional politics that we see, and democracy, electoral politics. All this is just, it falls by the wayside when you think about a conflict as wide-ranging and as far-reaching as Kashmir. So The history of Kashmir, of course, in a nutshell, is the history of how the waves of Islamic invasion that we've seen in the country, Kashmir has kind of borne the brunt of that, because there were, on the northwestern side, there are regions that we completely lost, right? And beyond Kashmir towards the mainland India, there are regions that we saved. And Kashmir happens to be that cusp where the battle is going on as we speak. So the future of India as a civilizational entity, even territorially speaking, the future of India as a single unit is to a large extent dependent on how Kashmir fares politically. Whether we are able to maintain our hold over the territory, one, and secondly, whether we are able to maintain that hold civilizationally. By civilizationally, I mean what is the nature of Kashmiri society. Right now, we have kind of lost Kashmir civilizationally because it's an outrightly Islamist society which has no place for Hindus, that is Kafirs. And that they've demonstrated in 1990 when they kicked us out of the valley. So right now, it's in a dual sort of relationship with India. Civilizationally, we've kind of lost it. And territorially, we are maintaining control. So we need to get back civilizational control over
But
Kashmir.
civilizationally, Kashmir की importance, throw shed some light onto it, ताकि वो ब्रास तरंगिनी हो या फिर वहाँ पे शारदा पीठ हो.
So for the longest time, Kashmir has been the sort of literary, spiritual, and intellectual powerhouse of India. Some scholars estimate that about 40% of the Sanskrit literature that we have access to currently was produced in Kashmir. Now the figure may vary here and there, but it gives you an idea that it was disproportionately representative. Kashmir's literature in the entire civilizational literature, the body of civilizational literature that we have, उसमें कश्मीर का 40% है. तो from very early on, Kashmir happened to be like this place where a lot of what we call intellectual activity was happening, and बहुत सारे ग्रंथ लिखे जा रहे थे. So there are, these are debatable scholarly points whether Panini was from Kashmir or from Punjab or wherever. But anything you see anything of value that you see, if you take Panini's Ashtadhyayi, there are scholars who argue that it was actually written in Kashmir, that Panini was a Kashmiri. But uske upar build jo hua hai, the kind of commentaries that have been written, a lot has been done in Kashmir. So similarly, Natya Shastra, you'll see Natya Shastra also, whether it is written in Kashmir or not is again debatable, but the tradition of Natya Shastra and its further evolution, most famously with Acharya Abhinav Gupta's contribution to the tradition. So these are things that are undeniable in terms of the contribution that Kashmir had towards the literary and civilizational culture and the religious ideas that we are so familiar with today, whether it is Tantra, whether it is Kashmir Shaivism, whether it is Natya Shastra. So all that.
Is there a number? Is there a number with regards to a date or time span? किस time पर when we are speaking about the glory of Kashmir, कौन से phase की हम बात कर रहे हैं?
इसमें तो हम उस phase की बात कर रहे हैं, the early part of the millennium, before the Islamic invasions happened. There was a lot of Buddhist influence also for some time in Kashmir, and it is again a matter of scholarly debate whether it was a net positive or not. But some scholars argue that it was Buddhism which actually paved the way for eventual Islamization of Kashmir. Having said that, even Buddhist literature, which is also part of our heritage, was also to a large extent written in Kashmir, and a lot of the Buddhist philosophical thought that we have access to now comes from Kashmir.
When you say Kashmir, are you concentrated on the Kashmir Valley per se, or do you mean ऊपर जो गिलगित बाल्टिस्तान हो गया या northwestern provinces?
The Kashmir Valley was of course the hotbed, but these other areas which are now part of Pakistan were also part of the larger Kashmir area, and of course Sharda Peeth happens to be in Pakistan now. And Sharda Peeth is the Peeth which is directly related to the, the learning and the knowledge and the wisdom. It is Sharda who's the Bhagavati of all these attributes. So the fall of Sharda, I suppose, is a great loss at that plane, which further then reflects in the material loss of Kashmir. So then all this changed in the somewhere around the 1300s when Islam was properly established.
So prior to it, जैसे इस्लामिक इन्वेजन भी एक तो जनरली हम 700 AD के पास मान के चलते हैं कि इस्लामिक ऑनस्लॉट्स और इन्वेजन आने स्टार्ट हो गए थे. इट टुक अनदर 300-400 ईयर्स और उससे पहले नॉर्थ वेस्टर्न पोर्शन के अंदर रिपीटेड अटैक्स हो रहे थे.
हाँ जी.
तो चाहे आप हिंदू कुश बोले या ये अपना गिलगित बाल्टिस्तान हो गया, ये पूरा का पूरा जो एरिया है वॉज फेसिंग दिस ऑनस्लॉट. नाउ कैन यू हेल्प अस ट्रेस कि मल्टीपल इन्वेजन्स कौन से हो रहे थे बिफोर वी जंप इनटू कश्मीर इन्वेजन, या कश्मीर के अंदर किस तरह से?
कश्मीर में तो काफ़ी साल, जो लगभग 500 साल का रेजिस्टेंस जो है वो तो रहा ही. संग्राम राज ही सक्सेसफुली he resisted the invasions, the Muslim invasions. Then Lalitaditya is famous for expanding his empire. He's one of the largest empires that ever existed in India. So these are all.
What is the territorial expansion that you're talking about?
All the way from Afghanistan to Magad, I suppose. I'm not entirely sure of the exact boundaries, but roughly speaking, it is that entire region from northwest to the east of India. A huge region was under Lalitaditya, and then Sangram Raj and others. And it is under their rule and under their patronization that a lot of the civilizational cultural work that we were speaking about earlier actually flourished.
Okay.
And it is only in that period that the final flowering of the Kashmiri literary tradition happened. But some people also say that, while that was the outer expression, which was very vibrant and bright, but it also was sort of standing on its last legs at that time. Because then after that only, after these early kings, the later Hindu dynasties were not as resilient, and there was a lot of political turmoil before Islam actually was able to set foot.
Okay, so there was a political turmoil in the same neighborhood or same region, and it's a consequence of the same कि the Islamic invasions were able to make an.
I mean, history is not. Yeah, history is not so linear. I don't know if we should use the term कि it was a consequence of that, but of course, because it was already in a political turmoil, it was easier for outside forces to disrupt the existing setup and set up a new sort of mechanism of rule.
So what you're saying is कि लगभग 13-14 century,
हाँ जी,
13-14 century के अंदर कश्मीर का इस्लामाइजेशन sort of start हो गया proper, or do you say कि it was toppled over?
I think the first maybe the first century or so, it wasn't as hard as it was later on, because earlier it was a period of political consolidation when Rinchen he was actually a Buddhist and he became a Muslim, and then he consolidated his rule. But it was
Tell more about. So Rinchen was
he was a Buddhist. He came from the Ladakh area.
Okay.
And then he sort of conspired and to kill the king, the Hindu king, and then he set up his own. He got himself enthroned as the king, and then the story was that he offered to become Hindu, but the Hindus rejected. I mean, the Brahmins rejected it, and so then he chose to become Muslim. So again, अगर आप उसको एकदम simplistic तरीके में देखोगे तो आप बोलोगे अरे इन्होंने तो गलत कर दिया, but I'm sure that they had their reasons for not accepting his offer. It's not like our ancestors were fools to do something and because they were of a certain ideology. This ideological nonsense is a very modern thing, right? Our ancestors were more pragmatic about things. So I haven't come across a serious study, to be honest, which delves into this fact. Ki why was he actually rejected? It's more an ideological perspective that is given. Oh, he shouldn't have done that. Or they shouldn't have rejected his offer because later you see what happened. But that is all hindsight mein dekha jayega. But no one has actually not even properly speculated कि क्या हो सकते थे pragmatic reasons for him not becoming a Hindu, because he was not anyway the best of characters around. He was very crooked and very devious.
Which years are we talking about here?
It's something in mid 1300s.
Mid 1300s. And then he converted to Islam.
Yes, he converted to Islam.
And do you suggest कि उसके बाद, or does the reading goes कि उसके बाद the Islamic conquest increased in pace?
Of course, then once Islam set foot in the valley, then it never left. After that, the greatest...
So is this why they say that it was essentially a Buddhist who sort of opened the floodgates for Islam in the valley?
He did, but it's not. No, they don't say that. The question is whether Buddhism created political instability in Kashmir, which later on led to these factional and...
Did it do that? Because ये debate last millennia के starting के अंदर ही होना start हो गई थी. In fact, the conflict between Buddhists and Sanatanis or Buddhists and Brahmins. So a lot of leftist historians or D.N. Jhas of the world, they write it about कि Buddhists were in conflicts with the Brahminical order, जिस वजह से उनके बीच में एक झगड़ा चला होता था, जिस वजह से that's how perhaps it went. But there's another point of view जिसके अंदर ऐसे कि there was no, or you would like to believe it कि इतना ऐसा लंबा चौड़ा कोई conflict नहीं था between Buddhists and Brahmins, ऐसा कोई लंबा चौड़ा conflict नहीं था, because at the end of the day, or people would like to believe at the end of the day, they are on the larger, the same dharmic thought process, or people or faiths that have taken root or formed in India.
So Arjun, to be very honest, as far as the Kashmir history is concerned, this Buddhist question is something I am deeply interested in. But at this point, I'm still trying to fully understand. So it would be dishonest of me intellectually to say anything with a firm, as a firm view. I do understand from the little that I've read that Buddhists or Buddhism paved the way for Islam. How exactly that happened, perhaps we'll have another conversation a year later and I can, delve into that. But generally speaking, if we remove the historical aspect and delve on the philosophy of it, कि भाई Buddhism or Hinduism में कभी conflict था या नहीं, so you will find both the strains. You will find a strain of harmony where, there's a lot of exchange. Also, Buddhism is largely, philosophically, it is all borrowed from the Upanishadic philosophical framework. उसमें कुछ नया है नहीं. The terminologies have changed and a few theological differences, not theological but ontological differences कह लो, epistemological differences कह लो, in terms of the nature of reality and semantic differences of how you call a certain state, whether it is nirvana, moksha, whether their nirvana is the same as our nirvana, whether their definition of the self or not self. These are very rarefied wale debates hain ye. At a certain time, to even indulge in those debates right now is stupidity.
But you would agree कि at the end of the day, जो पुराने philosophical arguments थे that make the Sanatan faith, उसी की अलग अलग renditions हैं धार्मिक faith system के अंदर जितने भी आते हैं, चाहे आप सिखिज्म की बात करें या बुद्धिज्म की बात करें, उसी के कुछ philosophical arguments हैं और
philosophically there is a lot of overlap. आप जब
and an oversimplification also in methods, processes or thinking.
That's what I'm coming to. तो अगर आप Hinduism versus the rest of the broader Indic faith को देखते हैं, तो philosophically there is a lot of overlap. It's difficult to say where, for example, Buddhism ends and Advaita Vedanta begins. They'll fight bitterly over that narrow band of differences, but a lot of the substratum is common.
Same.
But the difference is more in terms of dharma, not in terms of the adhyatma. You see, there is a difference between the Adhyatmic view and the Dharmic view. The Dharmic view has to take into account lived reality. Dharma is what we do, what we follow, what we practice. Adhyatma is more esoteric, right? It's like saying that you go deep into samadhi और वहाँ तुमने क्या देखा, when you come back and you report, दो लोग same चीज़ देख सकते हैं but दो different तरीके से उसको express कर सकते हैं. But dharma is where we find common vocabulary, and we have to agree on a lot of things about how to go about living. In that, classical Hinduism, which is Sanatan Dharma, is perhaps the clearest and the philosophically the most grounded school. The rest of the schools don't really have an answer. Even within Sanatan Dharma, let's say the smriti based approach to social order, जिसको वर्णाश्रम धर्म जिसका mainstay है, उसको जिसको so called heterodox schools कहते हैं ना, जैसे तांत्रिक schools को heterodox schools कहते हैं, they are not really commenting on how we should be living. They are really commenting on कि हमारी practice कैसे होगी, किसको दीक्षा का अधिकार है और किसको नहीं है. But everyone agrees that social order को stable बनाने के लिए क्या चाहिए, because that was the normative dominant reality. That is what worked all the time. And the differences lie in that. And here the Sanatan Dharma is highly ritualistic. Because ritual is what binds communities. Ritual is what gets people to work together for common goals. It is the non-verbal vocabulary that ties communities together. That is where the other traditions, the so-called wider Indian family, they have no choice but either to accept it, and grudgingly also, but to follow that. And philosophically they may differ.
No, point agreed. But do you think our ancestors, what you call Sanatan Dharma, do you think our ancestors, they were working towards building we're largely building a Sanatan Dharma? Yeah, back in the day, everybody was finding a path towards, could be मोक्ष की तरफ जा रहे हैं, या फिर किस तरह से इकोनॉमी होनी चाहिए, किस तरह से हमारा सोशल सिस्टम होना चाहिए, किस तरह से हमारा समाज प्रोग्रेस करे, हाउ आवर सोसाइटी शुड बी स्ट्रक्चर्ड, हाउ आवर किंगडम शुड बी स्ट्रक्चर्ड, एंड एवरीबडी वाज सॉर्ट ऑफ वर्किंग टू गेट दैट राइट. I'm talking about pre-Islamic invasions. Everybody was sort of trying to get that right, and all that information filtered out, and commonalities which have stood the test of time is what makes Sanatan Dharma today.
It is what worked, of course, and what worked was not something that was really debated, because when things work, it's not something that you want to change, right? It is only when things fall apart that you start questioning that order. Like today also, if we speak in the present, most of the criticism that comes of Varnashrama Dharma is that, अरे अगर इतना ही सही था तो फिर हारे क्यों? So you might argue that that is a very simplistic view of reality, and you are looking back and blaming everything on Varnashram Dharma. बहुत कुछ हुआ history में, है ना? It's a complex story.
Fair point to say कि ये इस civilization state का, भारतीय सभ्यता का एक fundamental tenet है, और क्योंकि भारतीय सभ्यता ही भारतीय समाज है, and every society knows its own ways or finds its ways for self-correction. कि whenever there's a conflict, whenever there's a turmoil, whenever there's a debate on certain matters, whenever a system fails, society sort of comes together, starts with one person, then goes on to two, then it just grows up, and there's a consensus building up in society कि this thing is not working, this thing may work, let's find a way around it. Do you think Buddhism was, and we agree to a certain extent, that Buddhism also progressed and started in some sense as a philosophical thought process, ये कर रहे हैं, turning it and marking itself as a different faith system or religion? Is it a modern construct?
No, it's not, because Buddhism actually rejected the authority of the Veda. And so from that standpoint, if you look at it from a Hindu standpoint, it is a Nastic faith. Because that is the definition, that is the classical definition of Nastic, which is someone who does not take the Veda as pramana. So,
Okay, a common definition of Nastic is not believing in God. So, does it
not
believe
believing in God is a derivative of that idea, but primarily it is about rejecting Veda as the pramana.
Okay, but Buddhists believe in God or no?
Buddhists don't actually. Buddhists don't have God. The Mahayana school, they have many gods and deities, and they are primarily influenced by Tantric Hinduism, which is why they have the same pantheon and even the same gods sometimes. But the Hinayana school does not believe, the Hinayan, the smaller vehicle, they don't believe in deities like that, right? So their emphasis is more on practice. I'll tell you how, by giving an analogy, that what Buddhism is to Hinduism is something like what Protestant Christianity is to Catholicism. That it is a monasticization of society. That you had someone who decided to leave everything behind. He was a prince, he was a Kshatriya, and he left everything behind. And that because he became who he was, and people followed. And so that became like, that is like giving up your responsibilities as per the Sanatan Dharmic ideas.
But not to sound disrespectful at all, पर इसी तरह से तो बाकी मतलब दिस इज अ कॉमन टेम्पलेट ना, जैनिज्म में भी ये टेम्पलेट है, सिखिज्म में भी है, ऑल धार्मिक फेथ्स हैव दिस सॉर्ट ऑफ टेम्पलेट कि भाई somebody was on a high pedestal, he had everything, all the luxuries in life, and he decided कि मुझे अब इस रास्ते पे जाना है, was it some calling, whatever may be the reason.
Correct.
ठीक, तो यही बुद्धिज्म में हुआ और यही जैनिज्म में हुआ. जैनिज्म was perhaps a tough to follow a faith कि जैनिज्म और हिंदूज में, मॉडर्न हिंदूज, और इफ नॉट मॉडर्न सनातनीज, मॉडर्न हिंदूज जो अपनी भी आइडेंटिटी के बारे में शायद ढंग से बता ना पाए किसी को, दे आर ऑल्सो डाउटफुल अबाउट कि कितना डिफरेंस है जैन्स और हिंदूज में. तो इनफैक्ट सिखिज्म ऑल्सो फॉर दैट मैटर, लॉन्गेस्ट टाइम तक सिखिज्म वॉज रिटन एज अ पंथ ऑफ हिंदू फेथ, बट is the politicization of that faith or that philosophical thought process or that group is a politicization that compels, at times forces, or pushes one to call their own self or their grouping as a different faith system or religion.
So I don't know why Hindus debate all this, to be honest. I mean, these are questions that these so-called faiths, the so-called panths, if you insist, whether it is the Sikhs, whether it is the Buddhists, whether it is the Jains, these are questions that they have to grapple with. Why should we break our heads over it, is my fundamental question. We are happy if a Jain says that I am Hindu, I mean, it's his, be my guest. I am no, मैं यहाँ ठेकेदार थोड़ी बैठा हूँ, या तुम थोड़ी ठेकेदार बैठे हो किसी को बोलने का तुम हिंदू हो या नहीं हो. It's more a matter of self-identity. How they resolve the contradictions of philosophy and religion and the higher metaphysics is up to them. So Jain बताए ना, if they don't agree with the Vedas, but if they don't agree with the Vedas, what is the social order that they advocate for in the absence of faith in the Vedas? Because the Vedas have the entire Smriti corpus, the Dharma Shastras, that define how a society should be organized. What does Buddhism have for that? Nothing, right? What does Jainism have for that? So they largely accommodated in the same framework. When we say that the Tantrics, for example, and I come from a Tantric community, Kashmiri Pandits have like I said, we've contributed to the Tantric literature. But Tantrics and everything that we know of Tantra today, the great texts that were written, the practices, the esoteric stuff, the sects that came along, all that happened, all that thrived under the umbrella of the dharmic society, right? Which gave them that space to practice all these things. Even extreme practices, like even practices which are not mainstream, like the Kaula religion entirely, which is, they practice, or the left-handed path of Tantra, which is Vamachari. The
What are both of
Vamachari-
them?
No, like these are gradations, or these are like divisions of the tantric practice. Right? You have Dakshinachar, which is right-handed path, which is very congruent, very similar to the Vedic practice, Satvik and all that. Then you have the left-handed path, which is the Vamachar, which is, practicing in cremation grounds, and the Kapalikas who take these, the skulls with the Aghoris, with, all those scary-looking sannyasis who can do stuff and do magic and all that. Then you have the Kaulachar, which is, using the Panchamakaras, for example. They go even beyond the Vamacharis. They are more, sort of heterodox that way. So all this is, it thrived and it flourished under that dharmic umbrella of Sanatana Dharma, which was essentially Vedic in nature, right? It was based on the so-called Manuvad, that order. It is under that protection where you had different communities doing their jobs, and which allowed for this diversity to flourish. So without that social order, my question is, wo aata kahan se? How would you have such sects practicing their stuff and writing these things in isolation if it were, hypothetically speaking, an Islamic society or a Christian society? Or even a Buddhist society. What does the Buddhist religion have to say about how society should be organized? I'm not aware of any such thing.
So your argument largely is that yes, larger umbrella ke andar, they're all falling perhaps in the same bracket. It's a question that these guys have to answer. How essentially different are they? But you'd agree to this fact that this किसी एक faith का separate religion अपने आप को establish करना is in some ways a politicization of faith in modern times.
It is all this is all modern only. This terminology that we are using right now, कि religion है, these, whether it is a faith को religion बनाना, whether it is Hindu or not.
और a philosophical system है, Hindu है, Sanatan
धर्म है. These are all things that we are looking at through an alien lens.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Because we are not a ritualized society anymore. If we were a ritualized society, that means that we would know who we are, and we would know between the two of us, for example, if we come from different communities, I would know you, you would know me much better than we know each other right now, because we don't know ourselves right now. You see? So we are doing arbitrary, role play right now.
So when do you think this went for a toss?
Well, it went for a toss. I think as part of Kali Yuga itself, our traditional narrative is that, Kali Yuga mein to decline hota hi hai dharm ka, to wo hua hi because, society.
So that's one way to look at it, but let's look at it from a modern.
But yeah, I mean, a more empirical or a more decisive time frame would be the Islamic invasion first, which destroyed all the institutions that made such a society possible, a social order of this kind possible. And later on, after the institutions were gone, it went for the individuals under the British rule. Because at that time, it was when you internalized this narrative. So colonization, the waves of colonization that happened, the Islamic wave was more about destroying institutions, and the Christian wave or the British wave was more about internalization within the individual.
Okay, so essentially एक ने institutions खत्म करे,
हाँ जी,
and दूसरी phase ने ये ensure कर दिया कि वो एक नया thought process जिसके अंदर आप ही अपनी identity के बारे में इतना confused हैं, and you're assessing yourself from a foreign lens, that started happening in the colonial times. Today, one thing that in 1947 हम argue करते हैं कि would you say कि 1947 के अंदर we were turning towards a Hindu society? क्या ये realization कुछ लोगों के पास था in pre-independence era that this battle जो पिछले 1000 साल से अब which has been going on for centuries, were there people largely in power or discussions and debates or of any importance who knew that or who understood the gravity of it? Because one way you're saying that institutions are gone, then you know that people have sort of internalized. People internalize only when people who are perhaps in an influential position or have some political power or clout, they started copying or following the narratives that are imposed on them. And unko dekha dekhi, the people from other stratas or people who are not as who will just perhaps replicate, who will just emulate what any other person from their immediate neighborhood who's more influential is doing. तो ड्यूरिंग द colonial टाइम्स you're saying कि ऐसी चीज़ हुई, पर क्या तब भी लोग मौजूद थे who understood really कि क्या हुआ है over the last centuries? How are they preserving कि centuries भर का ये जो onslaught हुआ है उनकी मेमोरी में कैसे स्टक रहा ये, और क्या वो अपने आप को अपनी उस आइडेंटिटी, चाहे वो सनातन आइडेंटिटी हो या हिंदू आइडेंटिटी हो या फिलोसॉफिकल सिस्टम्स की अद्वैत वेदांत की आइडेंटिटी हो, उसको तब कैसे प्रिजर्व किए हुए थे या किए हुए, इफ एट ऑल?
No, of course. I think they were smarter than us, and they were more rooted, more connected to the tradition than we are. So, I mean, it's a no-brainer to say that there were perhaps 1,000-fold more people at that time who knew and who acknowledged and who understood what was going on, and they had more clarity than us. We, on the other hand, may have the advantage of being on a vantage point and looking at this history with an additional 80 years of insight. And these 70, 80 years have been so transformative and so rapid in terms of changing society that maybe this is equivalent to 200, 300 years at that time, right? So that is why we can speak with such arrogance about it. But the main problem is not just that let's take the example of Maharaja Hari Singh, for example. He was a Dogra ruler, he was a Kshatriya, and he was ruling Kashmir at that time, which was Muslim majority.
हाँ, मतलब बिफोर यू कंटिन्यू, महाराजा हरी सिंह से बात करते हुए आप उससे पहले थोड़ा सा कश्मीर की पॉलिटिकल हिस्ट्री भी बता दीजिए, बिकॉज वी नो कि 13th सेंचुरी के अंदर ये हुआ था. व्हाट हैपेंड?
सो देन देयर वर waves and waves of these invasions, and one ruler after another came, the most notorious among them being Sikandar Butchikan, who by his title itself is a Butchikan who's destroying idols. So with each wave, people were either driven out of the valley or converted or killed. And the demographic inversion of Kashmir had been set in place. Roll out ho chuka tha. Or phir, after Butchikan, then there was the Mughal rule, which was relatively, better. But again, the conversions and the pressure on the populace to become Muslim was always there. Finally, there was the Afghan rule. The Chak dynasty came, then the Afghans ruled. That was particularly brutal in how they clamped down on the local populace, including Muslims. And finally, after the Afghan rule, there was a delegation of Kashmiri Pandits who went to the court of Maharaja Ranjit Singh. They had figured out the logistics and the strategy of dislodging the Afghans, and they placed their proposal before him, and in his magnanimity, and perhaps he also saw a lot of strategic sense in that, Maharaja Ranjit Singh invaded Kashmir and established the Sikh Empire. But that did not last too long, and it was just there for 27 years, after which there was that Anglo-Sikh war, and then finally the British granted that territory to the Dogras, and the Dogras ruled for about 100 years. Why did Dogras get the power? Because of that, the turmoil. It was given as a grant to, I think it was Gulab Singh, who was given the grant by the British because they had
sided with the British. Okay.
So with that, they established the Dogra princely state, and then in the Dogra rule, it was a period of resurgence of, and they started building dharmic institutions again, repairing temples that were destroyed earlier, whatever they could, and they did their job as a Kshatriya should, and they started reviving dharmic institutions, and they also patronized Kashmiri Pandits as in important positions. But then there was this modern wave of the modern republic had to come into being, and we all know the famous dilemma that the then Maharaja Hari Singh was facing. So coming back to that point, Maharaja Hari Singh represents that kind of dilemma, and he knew his responsibility. He knew what he was supposed to do. He had already done a lot of good work, right?
And the family had been doing.
The family had done, and he inherited a lot of that good work, right? He was continuing with that, but the political realities of the time were compelling, and he had to take a decision. Ki ab kahan jaye? For the longest time, he resisted because perhaps he wanted to continue as an independent ruler, but things did not work out that way, right? So eventually, then the Kabalis attacked, and they started raiding the entire thing, and then he fell short of manpower in the army. Then he had to make those frantic calls and appeals to the Indian state, to Nehru and all that, and then finally the Indian army came and saved Kashmir from being run over by these militia. And in exchange of that, he acceded to India. He signed the Treaty of Accession. Again, there may be more nuances to it. Like you could say that he knew that he had to eventually accede to India, but maybe he was buying more time, more negotiating power, and things like that.
Those are other nuances of it. But here, per se, like Dogras knew that they were working on for Hindu resurgence in some way.
Not resurgence. I mean, they were living their dharma. Okay. They were Kshatriyas, and they were the rulers, and they were concerned about the welfare of their praja. Okay. Right? Like in any other place.
But over the last 500 years, Kashmir Valley ke andar, a major onslaught as a consequence of the Islamic invasions had devastated almost everything.
Yes.
So one thing the Dogras knew that their dharma is Sanatan, and they have to preserve the institutions, the people, the temples, etc., and so on. Would you argue that Indian state ke andar bhi there were political leaders who understood that ye jo debate hai, what was happening in Kashmir, or what is the consequence, or what the dilemma that Kashmir is facing, was not merely political or territorial, it was also civilizational. You would agree to it?
Yes, of course. Of course, there were a lot of people who would, who would think like that. Even with the debate on Article 370, a lot of the bureaucrats, a lot of the Kashmiri Pandits, they also did not want 370. There were some Kashmiri Pandits who actually sided with Jawaharlal Nehru and said that 370 should be there. But there were others who refused, right? So that debate was always going on. So you can't deny that anyone that wisdom, that we don't say that it's only now that this has dawned upon people. It was always there, but the circumstances are always different.
No, so the reason I wanted to ask this is कि 75 years on, आज देश के अंदर अगर हम ये debates करते हैं ना about this realization that were we a civilizational state, these are treated as like questions which are I don't know what's the more traditionalist. Pride को तो बोला ही जाता है ना आपको.
वो वही है ना वो बात है.
So is it so ये 75 सालों के अंदर again जो institutions like we were talking about over the 500 years और इस्लामिक इन्वेजन्स के अंदर जो एजुकेशनल इंस्टीट्यूशंस खत्म किए गए, 47 के बाद जो रिसर्जेंस परहैप्स होनी चाहिए थी वो हो ही नहीं पाई, कि आपके इंस्टीट्यूशन जैसे बन ही नहीं पाए, और जो इंस्टीट्यूशन शायद बचे भी थे उस थॉट प्रोसेस वाले जो लोग थे वो उन इंस्टीट्यूशंस की एब्सेंस में या पॉलिटिकल पावर ना होने की वजह से और वट एवर मे बी अदर रीजंस, उसका कॉन्सिक्वेंस ये हुआ कि वो नहीं रहे उन पदों पर, एंड एज अ कॉन्सिक्वेंस जो समाज है वो भी अपने आप को उस तरह से देखना शायद कम करता गया कि आज भी वो डिबेट्स हो रही हैं कि क्या वो सिविलाइजेशन मुद्दा है क्या.
Yeah, so the thing is that these are debates and problems of a higher order. These are not like, these are complexity issues. These are problems of coordination. These are problems that afflict entire societies, and you cannot single out a one factor कि यही था. Like you cannot say कि यार ये इसलिए हुआ, जैसे पॉलिटिकल स्पेस में स्पेशली जो ये पॉलिटिकल डिस्कोर्स चलता है मॉडर्न इलेक्टोरल पॉलिटिक्स का, उसमें it's very very pedestrian in the sense that you look back at an event and you want to blame someone, like, or you want to elevate someone to the position of some messiah, or you want to blame someone and condemn them to hell. Like you can say कि हाँ देखो भाई गांधी ने ऐसे कर दिया, right? गांधी की वजह से हम लोग अभी भी सफ़र कर रहे हैं, बट गांधी ने ऐसा क्यों किया, उसके पीछे का जो पूरा खेल है वो तो कोई डिबेट नहीं कर रहा ना, बिकॉज यू वांट टू फाइंड अ स्केपगोट. बट द पॉइंट इज दैट नाउ वी हैव कम टू अ स्टेज वेयर दिस विल नो लॉन्गर डू. यू कांट जस्ट से कि उस बंदे ने ऐसा किया इसलिए वो कर लिया, मान लिया जी हाँ जी नेहरू खराब था, या गांधी ने ऐसा कर लिया, या सेक्युलरिज्म का कीड़ा जो है वो ब्रिटेन ने दे दिया, या जो भी था, तो अब ठीक कर दो अगर तुम्हें इतना ही पता है. तो वो नहीं हो पा रहा ना.
तो इसी के अंदर ना एक क्वेश्चन ये भी आता है कि वीव नोन कि आवर ग्रेट एंसेस्टर्स वर गिविंग डायरेक्शन टू आवर समाज, आवर सोसाइटी. दे वर राइटिंग थिंग्स, डॉक्यूमेंटिंग थिंग्स, इवन पासिंग डाउन इंफॉर्मेशन इन ओरल हिस्ट्रीज. दे वर शास्त्रा, दे वर स्मृतिज, जो शायद सब लोग ना पढ़ पाएँ, बट लार्जली सोसाइटी को किसी ना किसी फॉर्म के अंदर वो दैट मैसेज वॉज पास्ड ऑन. कि जैसे फॉर समबडी अगर वेद समझना मुश्किल है तो आप भगवद गीता का सार सुन लो, ठीक. और अगर आपको वो भी उसमें भी अगर आप अपना समय नहीं निकल रहा है तो अपनी दादी नानी से किससे समझ लो कि समाज में जीना कैसे है, सच क्या होता है, झूठ क्या होता है, ईमानदारी वफादारी क्या होती है, या फिर एक अच्छे एक सभ्य समाज के अंदर जीना कैसे है. ये मंथन हो रहा था हमारे समाज में फॉर द लॉन्गेस्ट टाइम. Institutions collapsed. The colonization was sort of internalized. 75 years on, who is discussing, writing or debating these things now?
कोई नहीं कर रहा ना, because what has happened is that
onus भी किसका है, responsibility किसकी है?
onus तो समाज का है. Onus तो समाज का है, because you have to, I mean, if we have skin in the game, right? If I want to pass on a livable world to my children, तो onus is on me. मतलब कल को आने वाली पीढ़ियाँ हमें थूकें, इस दृश्य से अपने आप को बचाने के लिए कुछ तो करना पड़ेगा ना. So that is essentially what it is. But what I was coming to is that we are in some sense fortunate that वो नहीं, एक चाइनीज कहावत है ना, that may you live in interesting times. So it is a curse as well as a blessing. You never know कि वो blessing है या curse है. Interesting time कुछ भी हो सकता है. तो हम interesting times में जी रहे हैं. वो इसलिए है क्योंकि हम जो है ना, we are living in times जहाँ पे the future is now, in the sense that for the longest time modernity, ever since modernity came into being, it started spitting on the past, saying that, you know, we have finally arrived, we know who we are, और बाकी तो पहले हमसे पहले सब घोंचू थे.
With this.
हाँ. तो ये थे. And you started doing things with the technological progress and all that, with the access to surplus energy that humanity had never had, right? Like with the fossil fuel era, you had energy maybe 100,000 times per capita than what your ancestors had. So the entire way of living was changing beyond your control, as it is happening right now. So in such times, there are things that you do, and you don't pay attention to this very often used term sustainability, for example, right? So you start borrowing from the future. This happens in any context, whether it is in terms of ecology or politics or, you know, even socially. So you start doing things and you say कि बाद में देख लेंगे. तो वो बाद में देखते देखते you keep borrowing from future, and finally we are the generation where the future is here to ask for its return, where it has now arrived and said कि तुम्हारे पुरखों ने ना इतना कर लिया, जो पिछले 3-4 generations, 6 generations है, वो सब हमसे पैसे ही मांग रहे थे, अब दो. एंड दैट यू सी, मतलब वो बहुत प्रत्यक्ष है. वो आप सबसे ज़्यादा वो आपको एनवायरमेंटल इसमें दिखेगा। यहाँ पे दिल्ली में हम बैठे हैं तो सर्दियों में यहाँ सांस लेना मुश्किल हो जाता है, इससे ज़्यादा प्रत्यक्ष कुछ नहीं हो सकता। बट नाउ यू कैन डू एनीथिंग अबाउट इट राइट नाउ, राइट, बिकॉज it is what it is, and you have lost all levers of control over keeping your environment clean and healthy. You have outsourced it to some agency, NDMC, NCD, जो भी state agency है. You have no say on it anymore, but you are paying that price, right? This is because things changed in a certain direction. Modernity made it happen, and we are in a situation where we are facing the brunt of it. And therefore, we understand this more sharply and closer to the heart. It cuts closer to the heart because we pay the price for it. So, everything that we have been discussing so far, ये जो civilizational बात करते हैं, civilizational, इसका ultimate बात यही है कि why now and why not in 47? Because now or never. अगर आज नहीं होगा तो we will completely lose control. You see? So it is now that we have to take charge of that destiny, whatever it may be. And to define what that destiny is means that you have to understand the bigger picture. You have to answer the meta questions and look at everything from a very, elevated point of view. कि ये सब चीज़ें जो हो रहा है ना, कि macro picture क्या है? And what compromises, what trade-offs can you do right now? So whether it is उसका जो फर्स्ट पॉइंट है, द प्री रेक्विजिट इज टू अंडरस्टैंड हु वी आर, व्हाट डिड आवर एंसेस्टर्स डू, जो सिविलाइजेशनल हम बात करते हैं, इंस्टेड ऑफ स्पिटिंग एट देम एंड इंस्टेड ऑफ सेइंग कि मनुस्मृति को जला दो और ये कर दो और वो कर दो, इफ यू एक्चुअली लुक एट इट एंड अंडरस्टैंड व्हाट इट सेड, then you find answers to problems that are pressing right now.
Yeah. To do a follow-up, मनुस्मृति इज ऑल्सो इन सम वे अ स्केपगोट, कि आपको और कुछ नहीं मिल रहा था तो आपने एक जगह सारी एनर्जीज फोकस करके आपने उसको वो बना दिया. वी अंडरस्टैंड नाउ क्लियरली थ्रू दीज कॉन्वर्सेशन, दिस डिस्कशन दैट इज हैपनिंग, कि because of a lot of things that have happened in the past and how in 1947 we could not perhaps debate on these issues, and here we are sitting today, और हमें रियलाइज़ हो रहा है कि एक्चुअली who we are, हमारा समाज या हमारे धर्म के बारे में मंथन करने के लिए कोई जगह बची ही नहीं. और वो जगह इसलिए नहीं बची, किसी ने शायद इतना रेलिवेंट सोचा ही नहीं, या वी लॉस्ट ट्रैक, कि आज हमारे समाज के अंदर कई सारे ऐसे रिलीजियस या धर्म से जुड़े हुए कई ऐसे संगठन हो सकते हैं, परंतु उन किसी भी संगठनों के अंदर वो चर्चा, वो गहन चर्चा ऑन हु वी आर, व्हाट काइंड ऑफ सोसाइटी वी वांट, what is our society, what is an ideal society, what is an ideal Hindu society, और what is a society जो इस टेरिटोरियल फ्रेमवर्क के अंदर बैठती है और उसमें फ्लरिश कर रही थी, उसके बारे में मंथन ही नहीं हो रहा कई वर्षों से.
What is an ideal society, what is an ideal Hindu society के बारे में मंथन करने की कोई आवश्यकता नहीं है, क्योंकि वो शास्त्रों में दिया हुआ है कि हिंदू सोसाइटी क्या है आइडियल. मंथन करने की ज़रूरत इसमें, उसमें मैं बाद में आता हूँ. मंथन करने की आवश्यकता इसमें है कि हम आज की स्थिति में, आज के संदर्भ में उस आइडियल को शायद अचीव ना कर पाएं, तो हमें ट्रेड ऑफ्स क्या करने हैं, ये मंथन हो सकता है. लेकिन आइडियल क्या है वो फिक्स्ड है, वो चेंज नहीं होता. आइडियल इज आइडियल. आइडियल कम्स फ्रॉम अ हायर कॉन्शियसनेस. इफ यू बिलीव, इफ यू आर an आस्तिक, if you are an आस्तिक, then you believe that it comes from the divine, it comes from a higher place, and you have access to material that shows you how it worked.
So आज हम जिस पोजीशन पे हैं, वो हमें ये मंथन करने की जरूरत है कि in the framework that we are living in right now, with structures, with institutions in place, modern economy in place, हम अपने समाज को कैसे और बेटर कर सकते हैं और
कैसे अलाइन करें कि जिस हद तक अलाइन हो सकता है, एंड टू एक्चुअली काउंटर और टू डील विद द लाइफ थ्रेटनिंग एग्जिस्टेंशियल चैलेंजेस ऑफ टुडे. एंड दिस इज नॉट जस्ट व्हेन वी से एग्जिस्टेंशियल, एकदम लोग उस पे आ जाते हैं ना, हिंदू मुस्लिम. इट इज इवन बियॉन्ड दैट. जब आपकी सांस लेने को सही हवा नहीं मिल रही, आपकी सॉइल में पॉइजन है, तो फिर ये सामाजिक झगड़े जो हैं वो थोड़ा छोटे लगने लगते हैं, क्योंकि you are dealing with water shortage, food shortage. Right now we are discussing, having this discussion at a time when there is this active Gulf war going on, which could, explode to whatever, it could become the third world war as we speak. we have already glimpsed what this bit of conflict that happened in the last 1 month could do to energy supply lines the world over. Yesterday only I was seeing what is happening in Sydney and other Australian cities, that their diesel has run out, and supermarkets mein supplies nahi aa rahi, prices are rising up. Imagine if this gets out of control. We sitting in this Delhi NCR with 3.5 crore people. Can you imagine what kind of chaos can be unleashed?
शुभ बोलो यार.
नहीं, I'm just saying that ये हम इस टाइम में रह रहे हैं, और इस टाइम में हमारी एनर्जी कहाँ जा रही है, किस चीज को डिस्कस कर रहे हैं? Why are we not even talking about how did we come to this point where a small conflict somewhere in some part of the world will threaten our lives, जो हमारा कोई stake ही नहीं है उस battle में, right? So these are things that the left has discussed, for example, but the Indian left is so pathetic that they reduce everything to this question of caste without even understanding caste. And the problem is that the Indian non-left, so-called right wing, does exactly the same. तो आप बात ही किस बारे में कर रहे हो? आप दूसरों को, मतलब आप मनुस्मृति दहन दिवस और ये सब ड्रामे करके एक्चुअली जो प्रॉब्लम है सामने, वो तो बात ही नहीं कर रहे भाई.
Okay, that being said, post 1947, first, who are Kashmiri Pandits and what happened post 1947 in the valley? Territorially ये clear हो गया कि पाकिस्तान बन गया. We understand very clearly कि Kashmir state became part of India, but कबालियों ने काफ़ी एक portion अपने पास which becomes Pakistan occupied Kashmir. But what happened in the Kashmir Valley post 47? Give me a brief and set up sort of a run up to eventually the 1990s.
Yeah, so after that there was a period of consolidation of power. पहले तो Sheikh Abdullah was made the so-called Prime Minister because Kashmir had special status. And in 53 then that status was abolished, and then the Indian regime sort of made a new chief minister, usko banish kar diya, Sheikh Abdullah, because Sheikh Abdullah was getting too arrogant and he wanted to be the new king. The prime minister he was already called, so he became too big for his own shoes, and they kind of sidelined him.
Again, Sheikh Abdullah here, he also understood कि उसका civilization, Islamic civilization, उसका धर्म क्या है?
हाँ, वो क्लैरिटी तो मुस्लिम्स में रहती ही है, पर मुस्लिम्स का देखो धर्म नहीं है. To be honest, तो इस्लाम धर्म नहीं है. इस्लाम is a way of waging war, if I may say so. but Sheikh Abdullah को ये पता था कि weaponize कैसे करना है democracy को, and that is what is happening. So even today, all this conflict between Hindus and Muslims is on account of Islam hijacking democracy. So वो ही कर रहा था Sheikh Abdullah, and then they sidelined him and they installed someone else, and for about a decade or so, a couple of decades, things were largely peaceful. A lot of funds were infused into the valley, और Bollywood की shootings वहाँ सारी हो रही थी. It was being promoted as a tourist destination, which is it's वो तो उसके obviously होगा ही क्योंकि because it's so beautiful. और उसके बाद फिर 70s में बाकी चीज़ें भी, बीच में एक वॉर हुआ पाकिस्तान के साथ, वो हार गए. फिर 72 में बांग्लादेश लिबरेट हुआ. So the Pakistani spirit was broken, but then Ziaul Haq came in as the general chief of army in Pakistan, and he waged that famous war, bleeding India by 1,000 cuts and all that. Or geopolitically, the situation was also evolving, and the Cold War was going on. USSR or US के बीच tensions थे. Then Afghanistan became a hotbed. Al-Qaeda came into being, all that was happening. And then finally with the collapse of the USSR, not the collapse, but before the collapse, the USSR had weakened. And so a lot of these militia that America had trained, which later became Al-Qaeda, those militia, a lot of them were deployed in Kashmir to train the local populace and they
Deployed in Kashmir
yes
on the behest of Pakistani or
ISI with the blessings of the American Empire.
Okay.
And they trained the local population and they supplied arms and ammunition and all that.
This was happening in 70s, 80s.
This was happening, yes, the process started in the 70s with the coming of Ziaul Haq, and in 80s it gained speed. And 86 is when the first violent expression of this happened with the riots, not the riots, but with the attack on Hindus in Anantnag. But Anantnag being Anantnag, it was, back then it was not so big. It was a district, one district in Kashmir, Srinagar भी नहीं था. उस टाइम पे ऐसे सोशल मीडिया की तरह ये नहीं होता था, इतना इंफॉर्मेशन फ्लो नहीं था. तो अनंतनाग में हुआ, there was some people who had to leave, the Hindus had to leave. Some of them came to Srinagar, some went to other parts of India. But finally, from 86 to 90, it really peaked, the violence. And bomb blasts and crossfires and shootings. These things were very normal day by day in the entire valley.
So in a nutshell, Pakistan saw an opportunity because Pakistan is an Islamic state. It found partners in local neighborhood, their immediate neighborhood, Afghanistan and militia trained. And they found its support with Americas also. Perhaps they thought they could have their way. And because they had already experimented with something like this 30, 40 years ago when the Qabilis came in. And they saw an opportunity. And the larger Ziaul Haq wala idea tha, lead India by 1,000 cuts. वो ट्रेनिंग हुई and it was on in this phase. But demography थी क्या उस phase के अंदर? So these 30-40 years largely demography थी क्या? Because
demography was totally Hindus were totally outnumbered, maybe by 2 or 3 to 97 types. Okay.
So there was a small proportion of Kashmiri Pandits. And when we say Kashmiri Pandits, are there do we say that all of them were Brahmins?
Yeah, Kashmiri Pandits are Brahmins.
क्या और जातियों के या और कम्युनिटीज नहीं थी जो हिंदू कम्युनिटीज?
सिख रूल और डोगरा रूल में I'm not sure between which of the two. I think in the Dogra rule only, a lot of the Khatris from Punjab had moved into Delhi, into Kashmir. And they were significant in number, but not मतलब ऐसा कोई outnumber नहीं कर रहे थे. But there was a good sizable community of Sikhs and Khatris, Khatri Punjabi Hindus in Kashmir.
So they also were
they were
in
also,
the line of
yeah. The Sikhs in this case also were in the line of fire, if we may use that word. But later on, the Sikhs sort of had an arrangement with the Islamists
because of the Khalistani struggle that was happening.
Yes, so I mean this is the unofficial account that they, because at that time Punjab was also boiling. And so they said that if you do anything to Sikhs in Kashmir, then we will we'll stop your trucks passing through Punjab and you will see the consequences. So they had a deal. That is the thing. So with them, but despite that, they had the Chatti Singhpura massacre of Sikhs, which happened. But from what I hear is that the deal happened after that.
Okay. But ये भी है कि there were also
but Sikhs are very very minuscule in number. मतलब ऐसा कोई ऐसा statistically significant नहीं है.
So are you also indirectly arguing कि as a consequence of all these invasions, जो 500-600 साल के Islamic invasion हुए या post the British conquest or during the colonial rule, कि वैली में से धीरे धीरे कश्मीरी पंडितों के अलावा, ब्राह्मणों के अलावा बाकी सारी जातियां बिरादरियां जो लार्जर हिंदू समाज के हिस्से होते वो वहाँ से पलायन करके जा चुकी थी या कन्वर्ट कर चुकी थी?
नहीं, ऐसा जैसे मतलब जो
where were their chamars, where were the
जो हिस्टोरिकल टेक्स्ट्स हैं उसमें भी कश्मीरी डेमोग्राफिक में ब्राह्मण डोमिनेशन ही था. इट वाज लार्जली ब्राह्मण्स, but there were other varnas also. पहली बात तो बिफोर द 10th century the Kashmiri identity was not crystallized as such. Even Acharya Abhinav Gupta, who's the crest jewel of Kashmiri wisdom in medieval period, he his father was from Madhya Desh, so which is Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh. So the Kashmiri identity of Saraswat Brahmins जो उन्होंने मूव किया था वहाँ पे, वो सारस्वत ब्राह्मण तो ठीक है, बट एज सच जो कश्मीरी आइडेंटिटी जिसको हम आज मॉडर्न आइडेंटिटी बोलते हैं, वो थोड़ा फ्लक्स में ही था. और लॉट ऑफ हिंदू, देयर वाज अ लॉट ऑफ बैक एंड फोर्थ बिटवीन द हिंदूज ऑफ अदर और लार्जली द ब्राह्मण्स ऑफ अदर कम्युनिटीज, अदर रीजन्स एंड कश्मीरी ब्राह्मण्स. तो वो सब चलता ही रहता था. बट हिस्टोरिकली ऑल्सो द सोसाइटी वॉज डेमोग्राफिकली Brahmin majority.
नहीं तो I understand Brahmin majority of them, but this is also in some way a fact कि जो समाज होता है, जिसमें भारत के अंदर अगर आप समाज देखें, एक सभ्यता देखते हैं, वो सभ्यता वर्णाश्रम उसका एक फंडामेंटल स्ट्रक्चर है. और वर्णाश्रम के अंदर जो ब्राह्मणिकल हो गए, पंडित हो गए, वो एक स्ट्राटा है, बट somebody will have to protect the empire, somebody will have to do the other the merchant,
the trade,
and somebody will have to services industry. ये सारी तो are you arguing that by 1947 के जो पूरा का पूरा सिविलाइजेशन या समाज का जो स्ट्रक्चर बना हुआ था, उसके अंदर एक ही ऑर्डर जीवित था, या उसी बिरादरी के लोग बाकी काम में भी एंगेज थे?
नहीं, बाकी काम में भी एंगेज थे, क्योंकि मॉडर्निटी आ चुकी थी ना.
So the KP
बाकी काम हैं ही कितने. मतलब एक जब 47 से पहले कश्मीरी सोसाइटी में ऐसा कोई इंडस्ट्रियलाइज्ड तो था नहीं कश्मीर, तो वहाँ पे ऐसी कोई अपॉर्चुनिटीज़ भी नहीं थी. सो मोस्टली पीपल वर डूइंग व्हाट दे, मतलब एग्रीकल्चर कर रहे थे उस टाइम पे.
मैं कोई शिकारा चला रहे थे?
नहीं, शिकारा तो नहीं चला रहे थे, वो मोस्टली तो मुस्लिम डोमिनेटेड ही था.
ओके. और फिर दुकानें वगैरह या
दुकानें थे. सी, वो तो पूरी तरह से तब तक तो सोसाइटी पूरी तरह ट्रांसफॉर्म हो ही चुकी थी. तब तक also because of the economic, socio-economic changes after industrial revolution and also the collapse of the traditional order, तब तक तो कश्मीर was already changed.
But you understand ना fundamental question क्या होगा कि भाई एक गांव को चलाने के लिए आपको सभी वर्ण के लोग चाहिए. ठीक. पर
तो वर्ण तो थे ही नहीं ना, क्योंकि आप देखिए जब एक सोसाइटी 100% हिंदू से 2% हिंदू रह जाती है, तो 98% चेंज हो चुका है. उसमें 2% are Brahmins because they happen to be the majority even before. So that is what remained.
Okay.
बाकी सारे जो professions थे, they were Muslims.
Okay. फिर ये 4 साल का from 1986 to 1990 and the KPs was just overnight. मतलब I wrote in my book also कि I happened to interview some people जो ये बता रहे थे जाट्स फ्रॉम हरियाणा इन अम्बाला कैथल एरिया के अंदर, उनको कुरुक्षेत्र में दे हैव स्टोरीज के 1990s के अंदर कि उन्होंने देखा के सामने से कहता ये परिवार आ रहे हैं, यू नो, बट जो कॉम्प्लेक्शन से पता चल रहा है कि भाई इतने गोरे यहाँ के लोग नहीं हैं. कॉम्प्लेक्शन से पता चलता है कि भाई कश्मीर से आए हुए हैं, बात करने आ रहे हैं. आई रिकॉल एक व्यक्ति से, तो वो अब अम्बाला में है, वो व्यक्ति में को यही बता रहे थे कि I remember when I was in my, like he was saying, I remember when I was in my younger years, in 1990 में we were sitting a bunch of us friends and I saw a family, you know, bunch of families getting out of the railway station. तो उसमें एक आदमी आया था हमारे पास, कहते, और he was also saying कि समाज उनका या वो परिवार ऐसा होगा कि इतना प्रोग्रेसिव था कि जैसे आना है फट से उसके पीछे लेडी भी आई कि भाई खाने की कोई जगह है, कुछ ठहरने की जगह हो जाए, कुछ खाने कहीं पे खा सके, कि कश्मीर से आए हैं. कहते ये प्रॉब्लम आज इट्स अ कॉन्सिक्वेंस ऑफ सोशल मीडिया एंड इंटरनेट दैट वी आर सो क्विक विद आवर इन्फॉर्मेशन. अदरवाइज तो इन्फॉर्मेशन पास ऑन करने के लिए इट वाज यूजुअली द वर्ड ऑफ माउथ एंड इट वाज आल्सो सेंसर्ड इन मेनी वेज कि आपको पता ही नहीं चलता था. आई थिंक दैट इज वन अनदर वे, क्योंकि वो केपीज आपको जैसे ही अटैक स्टार्ट हुआ, जब तक दिल्ली के अंदर उसकी प्रोसेसिंग होनी चालू हुई, तब तक तो a lot of things had shaken that entire society and KPs were compelled to just for their very own survival, they had to move out, there was no other option.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, something similar happened in 1947 also. If the information had traveled faster, if the connectivity was so smooth, कि शायद perhaps like quicker action would have been there. That being said, तो 1990s के अंदर where are the important pockets जहाँ पे KPs आके settle हुए? One is Delhi, of course. But
Jammu में है. Jammu is the biggest hub for obvious reasons. Then there is Delhi, then there is Pune, Bangalore है. I think these are pretty much the major.
So major cities के अंदर
cities और जहाँ पे employment opportunities ज़्यादा है, जहाँ
So
इकोनॉमिक
much like how the way of the world was, कि when you're uprooted from the ground, you're finding a way कि किस तरह से कैसे survive किया जाए, how to make a mark.
Yeah, and I want to add something जो you mentioned about people you had interviewed. तो ये एक narrative है कि भाई कश्मीरी पंडित आए तो किसी ने पूछा नहीं और people. So a lot of my friends also and a lot of people I've met of late who have now understood what happened in 90. They express regret and they say that we are very sorry for not standing with you. But I think that by and large, the people, whoever met Kashmiri Pandits, whether it was in Jammu, whether it was in Delhi, my personal experience I'm saying, our first landlord was a Sardar where we settled. And they went out of their way to help us. And they were very supportive, they were very kind, very compassionate. And even in school admissions, I've heard stories, personal stories where people said कि नहीं तुम्हारे लिए रूल्स रिलैक्स कर देंगे, तुम कोई बात नहीं. जिसको पता चला उसने वैसे रिएक्ट किया. अब गलती उसकी थोड़ी है, जिसको पता ही नहीं कि क्या हुआ तो वो क्या करे. But in contrast, the Indian state was complicit in our plight because it was the duty of the Indian state to guarantee the fundamental right to life of its citizens. And they failed to do that because they were hand in gloves with the Islamists. There is no other explanation to it. So while the people of India, they were very, very supportive, accommodative, the Indian state, as it happens always in history, the Indian state is not a civilizational state. Therefore, it did not even recognize that such a thing happened. And fails to recognize or deliberately does not recognize it even today.
Why do you say so? First, 1990s में उस दौर के अंदर why do you say कि इस तरह की चीज़ हुई थी? And because you've read, studied and analyzed the situation over the years, what are the political factors? ऐसा हो क्यों रहा था?
Because it was a geopolitical game that was being played and India was hardly in the race. India was following orders. India had a very weak government at that time, and due to our commitment to certain foolish ideals, not commitment, but because that is what kept the people busy. The government was selling stories of secularism and that everything is fine and dandy and all that. And there was heavy censorship. People were not told of what was actually going on in Kashmir. And they allowed it to happen. The Home Minister at that point was Mufti Muhammad Sayyid. And Mufti Muhammad Sayyid की अपनी बेटी उसको kidnap करके in exchange of release of those hardcore terrorists. So all that is a proper conspiracy that happened.
तो बेटी मिली कहाँ थी?
वो तो फिर रिलीज कर दिया ना उसको. तो वो सब तो ड्रामा ही था. तो वो ड्रामा जो है, आई एम सेइंग दिस इज द होम मिनिस्टर ऑफ इंडिया यार. तो अब इससे ज्यादा क्या आपको प्रमाण चाहिए कि द इंडियन स्टेट वाज कंप्लिसिट इन दैट?
दैट बीइंग सेड, 2014 में प्राइम मिनिस्टर नरेंद्र मोदी उनका अपार्ट फ्रॉम सो दिस वी डिस्कस बिफोर कि सॉर्ट ऑफ फॉर एवरी category or every kind of vote bank, there was something to offer. And there was also a significant number of Indians who wanted a vocal Hindu leader. The Pradhan Mantri Narendra Modi पार में. Do you think Prime Minister Narendra Modi, what has he done for the larger Hindu cause in comparison? तो फर्स्ट ऑफ कोर्स ये है कि भाई एक तो हमारी चाहत हो सकती है कि प्रधानमंत्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी वो 10 साल के अंदर डिक्लेयर कर दें कि भाई इंडिया इज अ हिंदू स्टेट, ठीक, एंड इट विल गिव राइट्स ऑफ एग्जिस्टेंस एंड फंडामेंटल राइट्स टू ऑल रिलीजन्स, बट इट विल से परहैप्स एक्सेप्ट कि इट इज़ अ हिंदू स्टेट. ये चाहत एक हो सकती है, बट इन जनरल 2014
मेरी पहली बात तो मेरी ये चाहती नहीं है.
नहीं, मैं आप ये तो 2014 के बाद से डू यू थिंक दैट द स्टेट इज डिफरेंट फ्रॉम द स्टेट या द वे दीज अफेयर्स वर vis-a-vis KPs per se, but then also of course the larger Hindu civilizational identity 2014 से पहले की जो सरकारें थी और 2014 के बाद वाली सरकार?
Yeah, in some ways, superficially speaking, yes.
आपने ये सुपरफिशियली डाला था.
नहीं नहीं, superficially because उसका लॉजिक है that this current government came into power on the back of this
Larger
narrative.
Hindu
This
movement,
narrative, this is what got them to power. The Ram Janmabhoomi movement is what fueled BJP's rise. This is all documented. This is not an opinion. This is a fact. So they had to, align with that narrative to some extent. But today, as we speak in 2025 or 2026, why is that narrative weakening? That is a question that needs to be asked, and perhaps there will be answers there. So, in terms of how they talk about stuff and what they took a long time to get the textbooks issue addressed, and even then some changes are made, but it's more like lip service की कर दिया, हाँ यहाँ पे ये change कर दिया, यहाँ पे धर्म ला दिया, यहाँ पे ये कर दिया. But one, why did it take so long? And secondly, उसमें fundamentally change नहीं किया है. History में इधर उधर change कर दिया, but there is a lot left to be desired. Now that is a subjective call. I may say कि lot left to be desired. दूसरा बोलेगा कि इतना तो कर दिया ना, and I concede that point. But what next? And I'll speak only, I don't want to get into this larger Hindutva debate because that's a rabbit hole that I choose to not enter. But I will speak as a Kashmiri Pandit. For a Kashmiri Pandit, from day one, Mr. Modi has largely ignored us, because his very first rally in the state, and I've written about this in Op India also, that this is way back 2017, I think, when I wrote this. His first rally in the state, where it was called the Lalkar Valley, I think, Lalkar Rally. और ललकार रैली के अंदर ही mentioned individual small communities like ये वाला गुज्जर, ये यहाँ पे वो है, ये मीरपुरी हैं, ये वो हैं, ये इन सब से हमारा नाता है. But he actually did not mention Kashmiri Pandits. In a rally pre-2014, is it possible for an astute politician to go to Jammu and Kashmir and not mention Kashmiri Pandits?
Why is that the case? Do you think the KPs were aligned politically with Congress?
No. The KPs are still not aligned with. KPs are out and out BJP supporters, largely speaking. It was because the issue of KP return is beyond the realm of electoral politics. They cannot make it happen. They know. So it is better to sweep it under the rug as opposed to making statements and promises that will later come back to haunt you. That is what it is. So
one of the critical demands of KPs is finding a way back.
It is the demand. It is the only demand. और कुछ नहीं है. So a lot of people argue कि हाँ 370 तो हटा दिया. तो उसका एनालॉजी है यार अर्जुन, कि आप किसी घर पे रह रहे थे, हैं, उसमें इलीगल, मतलब वो फोर्स्ड पोजेशन था, उसमें किराएदार बाकी लोग आए जा रहे थे, अल्टीमेटली ओनर को ही पटक के फेंक दिया. अब आपने कहा कि हाँ हम अब इसको लीज होल्ड से फ्री होल्ड कर देंगे, तो उससे हमारा क्या होगा, उससे हमें क्या फर्क पड़ेगा?
ये दिल्ली की जुबान बोल रहे हो.
ये समझ आया.
ये कश्मीर में नहीं होता. आर्टिकल 370,
वही तो कह रहा हूँ, यही तो
was it not, is it not a significant development?
It is a significant development in a certain context. It is legally a significant development, administratively a significant development. It allows.
But it has to follow up with the multiple.
As far as I am concerned, or people like me, my community is concerned, it was not something that made any difference to us. We celebrated like perhaps you did. है ना? जिस दिन 370 हटा, you were happy. I was also happy, but not as a KP, because as a KP मेरे लिए कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता 370 है या नहीं है.
No, but why? But is it not opening the gate, or at least?
So that's a myth. 370 जब exist कर रहा था, So what did 370 do ultimately?
मतलब एटलीस्ट 370 होते हुए भी तो केपीस गए ही थे.
370 होते हुए हम वहाँ रह रहे थे, लेकिन जो बड़ा प्रश्न ये उठता है कि अगर 370 की वजह से बाकी कम्युनिटीज़, मान लो आप वहाँ पे ज़मीन खरीदना चाहते थे, आप हरियाणा से हो, आप ज़मीन खरीदना चाहते थे, आपको मना था तो आपने नहीं खरीदा, यही आर्ग्यूमेंट है. अब आप खरीद सकते हो, है ना. लेकिन 370 के होते हुए जो जम्मू के लोग थे वो तो स्टेट सब्जेक्ट थे, वो तो खरीद सकते थे. कितने डोगरे वहाँ बसे? कोई नहीं बसा ना. बिकॉज the reality is different. The reality, actual physical reality is different. Legal reality is separate.
But
So,
is it not a possibility? And you know the valley much better than me. But when such an opening happens, there are powers and structures or institutions which are bigger than a person who may enter and perhaps open doors for the larger community to come in.
नहीं, ऐसे नहीं होता ना. उसके साइंस तो आएंगे ना कहीं पे. उसका पहला साइन ये होगा दैट द इंडियन स्टेट recognizes that what happened to Kashmiri Pandits was on account of religious intolerance of the majority community there.
And that the Indian state has not.
Show me one paper, one statement made by anyone in official capacity from 1990 to today, किसी भी पार्टी का हो, जिसने ये बोला हो कि ऐसा हुआ. So it is simply denied. This is denial.
So this larger. So one thing I have to give to your community then, कि one as a strength of your knowledge, and perhaps a tenacity, that it seems sort of unreal that you're arguing that political dispensation या political leader ने accept नहीं किया, but in largely the nation sort of understands, the people at large know.
Of course. But that is, वो तो हर
That's
issue.
been since 1990.
हाँ, वो हर इशू के लिए है. वो सिर्फ कश्मीरी पंडित इशू के लिए नहीं है, वो हर इशू के लिए है. आप कोई भी हिंदू समाज की कोई भी आप पॉइंट ले लो, तो the divergence, the gap between the state's position. शबरीमला ले लो. शबरीमला में क्या है? लोग थे ना जो कह रहे थे कि नहीं, हमें ट्रेडिशन के हिसाब से मंदिर चलाना है.
नहीं, पर समाज में बदलाव लाने का काम समाज करेगा या स्टेट करेगा?
स्टेट क्यों करेगा? स्टेट ने ठेका. स्टेट को तो समझ ही नहीं है समाज की,
है ना. तो समाज ने करना है
हाँ,
काम.
समाज करता है.
तो समाज को ये रियलाइजेशन, हाउ डू यू थिंक दिस रियलाइजेशन विल हैपन टू द समाज टू स्टार्ट डिबेटिंग एंड डिस्कसिंग दीज आइडियाज एंड वे फॉरवर्ड?
एक तो अवेयरनेस होता है अर्जुन. अवेयरनेस की आजकल कोई कमी नहीं है, क्योंकि एक्चुअली देयर इज हाइपर अवेयरनेस हर चीज की. यू नो, everyone has an opinion. People now on Twitter advise me about how I should think about Kashmir. Right? Like it's like saying that I should tell you about, you know, what it means to be a Jat. It's ridiculous, but that is what happens. People think that, you know, just because they have access to Twitter, they can actually.
अब तो और बुरा हाल है ना. तो इंस्टाग्राम देख लो.
इंस्टाग्राम है तो
पिक्चर देख के ही बना लिया ओपिनियन.
तो इसलिए अवेयरनेस का कोई इशू नहीं है. ज़्यादा अवेयरनेस हो गई एक्चुअली. बट द प्रॉब्लम इज दैट व्हाट डू यू डू नेक्स्ट. इशू इज विद द कलेक्टिव पैरालिसिस दैट हिंदू सोसाइटी इज अंडर. और वो पैरालिसिस तभी जा सकता है जब इफ यू हैव इंस्टीट्यूशंस इन प्लेस दैट कैन एक्चुअलाइज योर इंटेंट, दैट कैन मेक थिंग्स हैपन.
उसकी जड़ समाज को रखनी है.
ऑफ कोर्स.
Okay. Now, since and we've discussed this idea कि demography is destiny. I mean, so much so that even these were 10 years ago हमें discussion चालू हो रहा था, and then it found its way on opinion pieces, and now sort of it's 10 साल का ही ये नतीजा है, ये काम का नतीजा है कि अब it's perhaps हर दूसरे तीसरे दिन कोई व्यक्ति कोई चर्चा के अंदर किसी के अंदर डिस्कशन के अंदर बात करते हैं कि डेमोग्राफी इज़ एन इम्पॉर्टेंट फैक्टर, उसके लिए काम करना चाहिए. तभी चाहे संघ हो चाहे पार्टी हो, उसके अंदर इन मुद्दों पर या इन बातों के ऊपर चर्चा हो जाती है. दैट बीइंग सेड, किसी भी पॉलिटिकल डिस्पेंसेशन से क्या उम्मीद करनी चाहिए इन टर्म्स ऑफ के यू नो डेमोग्राफी इज डेस्टिनी? क्या स्टेट क्या कर सकती है टू एंश्योर दैट वी फॉल on the right side of this?
नहीं, हम लोगों को ना थोड़ा एक इंडियन एक्सेप्शनलिज्म का एक प्रॉब्लम है. Hindu समाज में, Indian समाज में. That happens with any society that is large. Like American exceptionalism, Americans don't know what is happening outside America. They fail to recognize, they fail to, locate countries, other major countries on the map also. तो वो एक इंडियन समाज में भी है that we think that somehow our problems are unique. But these are like universal structures. We live in the modern era with modern institutions. We have to first understand the nature of these institutions. और ये कहाँ से आए, इनका antecedents क्या है और ये कैसे function करते हैं. How do we leverage them without falling prey to this idea of worshipping them. Like ये है ना कि कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन डे, हम संविधान की पूजा करेंगे, हम लोकतंत्र के. अरे भाई, हर इंस्टीट्यूशन के ट्रेड ऑफ्स हैं, हर इंस्टीट्यूशन का कोई प्लसेस एंड माइनसेस हैं, उसका एक पीरियड ऑफ स्टार्ट है, उसका एक पीरियड ऑफ ग्लोरी है और उसका पीरियड ऑफ डिक्लाइन है. सब जो ऊपर जाता है वो नीचे आता है. दीज आर थिंग्स दैट, जिसको क्या कहें, जो बुद्धिजीवी वर्ग है समाज का, वो कहाँ है. वो ये सब डिस्कस करना चाहिए ना, वो ये सब बात करने चाहिए ना कि क्या हो रहा है, क्यों हो रहा है, कैसे हो रहा है. एकेडेमिया कहाँ है भारत का. मैं यही, मतलब मेरे को एक चीज,
कहाँ है अभी, वो स्टार्टअप्स बना रहा है,
वो कास्ट कर रहा है ना.
अच्छा.
तो वो मनुस्मृति चला रहा है.
अच्छा, बनारस पे यू बीन इन क्रॉसफायर, बनारस डेवलपमेंट के इशू पर, एंड यू वर वन ऑफ दोज फ्यू वॉइसेस जिनको सुबह से लेकर शाम तक, महीनों तक सुननी पड़ी थी.
अभी भी सुनता हूँ.
कैसे न छेड़ो हमें, हम सताए हुए. व्हाट इज योर ओपिनियन के मुद्दा क्या है कि देखो, ये बात सही है कि काशी, बनारस, ओल्ड सिटी, उसमें एंड इट वाज लिविंग इट्स थ्रू इट्स ओन glory stories, but much like every other thing in the society, उसमें एक अंदर एक मंथन चल रहा होता है, वो खुद ही सेल्फ करेक्शन मोड पे आता है. तो उसका रीडेवलपमेंट तो was, it was perhaps time कि उसके बारे में कुछ करा जाए. ठीक. When nobody was doing it, तब मुद्दा था कि यार
कुछ नहीं कर रहे, कितना गंदा है. हाँ,
जब अब करना शुरू हुआ तब एक और डिबेट चालू होगी. व्हाट इज योर ओपिनियन ऑन इट?
नहीं, मैं उसको बहुत पार्टी एग्नोस्टिक टर्म्स में देखता हूँ, क्योंकि मेरे लिए जो इंडियन स्टेट की रियलिटी है, स्पेशली एज अ कश्मीरी पंडित, मेरे लिए बहुत ही अलग रियलिटी है फ्रॉम अदर पीपल, अदर कम्युनिटीज, परहैप्स इवन योर्स, बिकॉज यू हैवंट हैड दैट काइंड ऑफ साक्षात्कार ऑफ द इंडियन स्टेट, एंड थैंकफुली सो, एंड मे दैट नेवर हैपन. बट जब आप उस तरह से देखते हो विद अ फेयर बिट ऑफ स्केप्टिसिज्म कि क्या चल रहा है, गवर्नमेंट क्यों ऐसी है, क्या कर रहे हैं, तो एक क्रिटिकल व्यू बन जाता है. और वो क्रिटिकल व्यू ये है कि मुझे क्या फ़र्क पड़ता है कि कौन सी पार्टी, कांग्रेस कर रही है, बीजेपी कर रही है, क्या कर रही है, कौन कर रही है. मुझे दिखता है कि इंडियन स्टेट इज़ इन द बिजनेस ऑफ रनिंग दीज रैकेट्स, कि जहाँ वो प्रॉब्लम क्रिएट करते हैं और फिर अपने आप प्रॉब्लम को सॉल्व करने के लिए ले आते हैं कि हाँ अब हमने कर दिया.
That's a bureaucrat's way of approaching problem, by the way.
But that is those are the people who run the country. यार. नेता तो आते हैं जाते हैं, bureaucracy is here to stay. That is the deep state. तो जब आपने 70 साल, मैं इंडियन स्टेट रिगार्डलेस ऑफ द पार्टी, 70 साल अगर आपने काशी को गंदी नाली बना दिया है, उसके बाद आपने उसको एक, you took a certain direction in terms of developing it, right? Now you are saying, you are framing it as if you are addressing that problem, while you are actually creating new problems, is my view. कि आप, how do you actually deal with the issue of heritage conservation? This is essentially what it is. काशी की heritage को आप conserve कैसे करोगे? It is not just about making it easy, making roads broad, ये वो सब तो, those are derivatives of that. Basically you're saying how do you make Kashi a city that we can feel proud of, है ना? How do you do that? By conserving the heritage and by cleaning it up, etc., etc. But what if in the process of doing this you actually destroy that heritage, is my question. So this is a question that no one has an answer for यार. मतलब इतना कुछ वहाँ पे जब हुआ, तो ये पूछना कि यार ये मंदिर क्यों तोड़ दिया, सिर्फ ये पूछना एंटी नेशनल हो गया यार। यू कांट आस्क कि ये वो पंचायतन मंदिर जो बने हुए हैं उसमें से 5 थे, हैं 5 में से 3 ही रह गए हैं, 2 कहाँ गए? आज भी मैं पूछता हूँ 2 कहाँ गए? वो 2 कहाँ गए उसका कोई जवाब नहीं है। अगर आपने पूछ लिया तो आप एंटी नेशनल हो। तो ऐसे थोड़ी होता है। आपको वहाँ पे जो मूर्तियों को उखाड़ने के लिए आपको लोकल मजदूर नहीं मिला क्योंकि हिंदुओं ने मना कर दिया, मैं नहीं कर रहा, ये मेरे लिए पाप है, तो आपको मालदा से मुसलमान मजदूर बुलाने पड़े। तो ये चीज़ अगर आप पॉइंट आउट करोगे तो आप एंटी नेशनल हो गए। It's not about develop. ये तो this is a caricature, this is a straw manning which they do, which they'll say कि हाँ ये ट्रैड है और ट्रैड होके ये ऐसी बात कर रहा है, इनको तो गंदगी ही चाहिए, इनको तो वहाँ पे ये टॉयलेट्स बना रखे थे मंदिरों। कौन से टॉयलेट्स? क्या टॉयलेट्स? क्या बात कर रहे हो आप? जो लोग वहाँ मंदिर, जिनके घरों में मंदिर थे, वो पागल हैं। मैं आज भी बात कह रहा हूँ, माई फंडामेंटल वे ऑफ लुकिंग एट थिंग्स इज कि इंडियन सोसाइटी हैज ऑलवेज बीन कंपैशनेट, हैज ऑलवेज बीन धार्मिक, अभी भी है। आप उनको मौका दो, आप उनको फ्रीडम दो, दे विल रिवर्ट टू दैट टुडे। रिवर्ट मीन्स दे विल बी रिग्रेसिव हो जाएंगे वो, एंड दे विल गो बैक टू दैट सेम वे ऑफ लिविंग। पर आप उनके ऊपर ये आरोप लगा के यू विल हैव योर वे, यू विल डू थिंग्स योर वे, दैट इज नॉट डन। मतलब इस प्रोसेस में अदर देन इंक्रीजिंग फुटफॉल एंड रेवेन्यू और कुछ नहीं हुआ। सो इट इज बेसिकली कमोडिटाइजेशन ऑफ काशी। इट इज उसको टूरिस्टी बनाना और उसको जितने ज़्यादा लोग आ सकें उतने बनाना, विदाउट गिविंग अ डैम अबाउट व्हाट द सिग्निफिकेंस ऑफ दैट प्लेस।
पॉइंट टेकन। पर आपने इसी जवाब के अंदर ना एक बात बोली कि व्हेन यू गिव इंडियंस एन अपॉर्चुनिटी टू रिवर्ट बैक टू देयर वेज दे विल। बट ये बात भी तो इतनी ही सच है कि पिछले 200-300 सालों के अंदर व्हेन मॉडर्न इकोनॉमी केम इन, इंडस्ट्रियल रेवोल्यूशन हुआ, समाज के अंदर परिवर्तन आना शुरू हुआ, तो हमारे जो मंदिर हैं या मंदिरों से जुड़े हुए जो लोग हैं, जो इंस्टीट्यूशन हैं, जो स्ट्रक्चर्स हैं, उसके अंदर भी
विकृतियाँ आ गई।
हाँ,
आ गई, वो तो आ गई। तो वही तो मैं कह रहा हूँ कि जो इंडियन स्टेट है, अगर वो सिविलाइजेशनल होता और वो मनुस्मृति दहन का सपोर्ट नहीं करता है, टैसिट और एक्सप्लिसिट, अगर वैसा नहीं होता तो वो मंदिरों का जो संचालन है वो कैसे फेज्ड मैनर में उसको आगम शास्त्र के अनुसार कैसे उसको वापस वहाँ पे लेके जाए, वो करता
नहीं। तो वो पॉइंट यही है ना कि एक तो विकृति आने में लग गए करने में, वो उसको एस्टैब्लिश करने में, एस्टैब्लिश इन द सेंस कि दिमागों के अंदर भी लोगों को एस्टैब्लिश करने में 500 साल लगा दिए, और उसको टू रिवर्स दैट चेंज, वो
तो बात करने में तो टैक्स नहीं लगता ना। मोस्टली तो नेता बात ही करते हैं ना, काम थोड़ी करते हैं। तो अगर नेता बात करते तो हमें ये आइडिया तो मिल जाता ना कि हाँ उस दिशा में जा रहा है, चाहे उसमें 200 साल लग जाए, लेकिन कोई बात तो कर रहा है। अगर आप बात ही नहीं कर रहे हो और जो बात कर रहा है उसके ऊपर क्लैम्प डाउन करके बोल रहे हो कि एंटी नेशनल है, तो फिर वो तो बात ही नहीं हो रही ना।
अच्छा, reclamation of temples, अयोध्या हुआ, काशी, मथुरा, व्हाट इज योर ओपिनियन? ये 3 ही चाहिए या बाकी और भी लेना चाहिए?
आई थिंक इट्स एकेडमिक डिबेट है ये, मतलब सोशल मीडिया डिबेट, एकेडमिक भी नहीं है, सोशल मीडिया डिबेट है। हाँ इतने होने चाहिए यार, ऑब्वियसली सारे होने चाहिए, उसमें क्या है, वो कोई इट्स अ नो ब्रेनर। लेकिन वो हो पाएंगे या नहीं, आई डोंट नो। anyone's, I mean my guess is as good as anyone's. बट इट्स नॉट अ डील ब्रेकर और एनीथिंग। मतलब ऐसा मेरी दृष्टि में ऐसा कुछ नहीं है कि
नए बना दो, ये भी मतलब है,
नए बना दो। अगर नए
जहाँ पर बन सकते जो ले सकते हो ले लो।
दोनों तरफ से मुझे कोई हार्ड लाइन वो लेने की जरूरत नहीं कि नहीं बस एक हो गया बस चुके, जैसे कई संस्थाएं ऐसा कर रही हैं कि नहीं बस इतना ही। और कई लोग बोलते हैं हमें तो सारे चाहिए, तो सारे चाहिए होने का वेरविदौल कहाँ है? तो आपको कहीं ना कहीं तो यू विल हैव टू,
तो मतलब एक समाज को पहले खुद ही मंथन करना पड़ेगा, समाज को चाहिए क्या।
मोर इम्पोर्टेंटली जो आपके पास है उसका आप कैसे, हाउ यू टेकिंग केयर ऑफ दोज टेम्पल्स, व्हाट इज योर आइडिया ऑफ पिलग्रिमेज, हाउ आर यू रीबिल्डिंग इंस्टीट्यूशंस। सी देयर इज I forgot to mention this, when we talk about the decline or the collapse of institutions, उसका अर्थ ये होता है कि there is a collapse of authority. We tend to speak of कि समाज मंथन करेगा। समाज मंथन नहीं करता, समाज फॉलो करता है। मंथन एक वर्ग करता है जिसका अधिकार है। अब मैं ये ब्राह्मणिकल चीज नहीं बोल रहा। अगर इफ इट्स अ टेम्पल मेड बाय अ सर्टेन कम्युनिटी, मान लीजिए एक सब क्लैन है वैश्यों का, जिन्होंने कोई बनिए हैं, उन्होंने अपना मंदिर बना दिया, उनके मंदिर में कोई किसी देवता की पूजा होती है, जैसे जैन है ना, उनके मंदिर होते हैं, उनकी किसी तरह से पूजा होती है, वो तो ब्राह्मणिकल नहीं है ना। लेकिन वो लोग डिसाइड करते हैं अपनी मान्यताओं के अनुसार, अपने शास्त्रों के अनुसार कि ये मंदिर कैसे चलेगा, तो आप उनको वो स्पेस दोगे, तो वो अथॉरिटी है।
नहीं, तो मैं यही जानना चाह रहा हूँ कि जब मैंने आपसे प्रश्न पूछा था तब आर यू आर्ग्यूइंग कि हमारे जो ये मंदिर हो गए या इस इंस्टीट्यूशंस हो गए, सामाजिक इंस्टीट्यूशन, उसके अंदर भी धर्म को लेकर या देश को कौन सी दिशा लेनी चाहिए, उसके बारे में आपके अनुसार कोई मंथन हो ही नहीं रहा?
नहीं, उसके बारे में क्या मंथन हो रहा है? कोई मंथन नहीं हो रहा। उसकी आप बताओ क्या मंथन हो रहा है?
आप वो भी अपने ही नेटवर्क के अंदर कर रहे हैं ना। अब जैसे कोई धर्म संप्रदाय कर रहा होगा, वो अपने इंस्टीट्यूशन के अंदर कर रहे हैं, अपने चार लोगों के बीच में कर रहे हैं।
There is no discourse around these ideas. No one is talking about कि क्या इस प्रकार से मंदिर, जैसे एक इशू है ये जो कास्ट को लेके उधर कि दलित पुजारी बना दो, तो दे हैव मेड दिस इनटू एन SJW इशू, सोशल जस्टिस वॉरियर बन गए हैं सब, कि नहीं उससे ये हो जाएगा। इसका क्या मतलब है यार? मतलब ये क्या है?
नहीं, मैं एक तो ये हो सकता है कि आपको इस बारे यू गेट टू हियर द फाइनल पॉइंट और कंक्लूजन, बट ऐसा हो सकता है दैट आपको सिर्फ वो मंथन के बाद निकला हो, तो फाइनल पॉइंट है वो पता चला हो, बट मंथन तो हो ही रहा है ना। क्या मंथन नहीं हो रहा?
जो मंथन कर रहे हैं क्या वो अधिकारी हैं मंथन करने के? अगर हम एग्जाम्पल के तौर पे शबरीमला का केस लेते हैं, तो शबरीमला में जिसने डिसाइड, तो मंथन तो हो रहा था ना कोर्ट में, तो उन्होंने कहा कि नहीं महिलाएं अंदर जाएंगी मंदिर के गर्भगृह में, तो वो मंथन हुआ, कोर्ट लीगल मंथन हुआ, लेकिन क्या वो अधिकार?
वो स्टेट है, पर
हाँ।
वो स्टेट के अगेंस्ट, वो वहाँ पे जो आर्ग्यू कर रहा था उसके अंदर, चाहे जैसा दीपक हो या फिर और जो लॉयर्स जो जुड़े हुए थे इस केस के साथ, दे दे नॉट गेटिंग नेसेसरी सपोर्ट फ्रॉम आर धार्मिक इंस्टीट्यूशंस और एनी इंस्टीट्यूशंस जो उसको कॉल, तो वो that's also part of that manthan na,
but that is limited to conflicts, that is limited to crisis situations.
Okay,
like there was manthan around Kashi because there is manthan around Kedarnath,
manthan around Ram Mandir, चला अच्छा,
this is only crisis. But how does is कोई व्यवस्था है क्या? कोई सोचने का तरीका, कोई फ्रेमवर्क है आपके पास? वो मंथन है ही नहीं। और क्या ऑब्जेक्टिव है?
so we are responding when we are attacked, when there's a problem, we are not,
and then we are fighting each other.
We are fighting, okay. अच्छा, बट वुड यू अग्री कि 2014 के बाद हिंदू को अपने विचार, अपने ओपिनियंस रखने की थोड़ी आज़ादी मिली?
2013 से पहले, 2014 से पहले क्या नहीं आज़ादी थी?
सम पीपल आर्ग्यू कि 2014 से पहले आप मुखर होकर पब्लिक प्लेटफॉर्म्स, इंस्टीट्यूशंस,
2014 हुआ क्यों?
क्योंकि 2006-07 के बाद इंटरनेट आया, ब्लॉग पोस्ट होने लगे, उसके अंदर आपको आज़ादी मिली।
सर आपने अपने प्रश्न का उत्तर दे दिया है।
तभी मैं जानना चाह रहा हूँ कि आपने 6 के अंदर ये शुरुआत हुई, 14 तक आपको वो
this is technological
it's a consequence of the technological advancement that you got the necessary freedom. But do you think जो इंस्टीट्यूशन से लोग थे उसके अंदर पहले फ्रीडम मिल ही नहीं पा रही थी, जो ट्रेडिशनल मीडिया था उसके अंदर मिल नहीं पा रही थी, उसमें अब मिलनी शुरू हुई?
It has gone the other, the pendulum has swung the other way. There is too much noise now. It has passed that point of optimal balance very quickly, and now it is in the zone of complete noise. And that you will see in any remove this religious dharmic ये वो, अगर आप वॉर की कवरेज देख लो, अभी करंट वॉर में there is only illusion and propaganda from all sides, and it's very difficult. Only AI can tell you what is AI and what is not. तो सब जब भी कोई कुछ वीडियो आता है सब पूछते हैं ग्रॉक प्लीज वेरीफाई, ग्रॉक प्लीज वेरीफाई, क्या होता है उसका मतलब? किसी को पता ही नहीं कि सच क्या है। अब ग्रॉक ही बताएगा भाई।
अच्छा सर, अगर आपकी परिकल्पना में ऐसी कौन सी ऐसी अम्ब्रेला इंस्टीट्यूशन या ऑर्गेनाइजेशन हो सकती है जो इस कॉमन लार्जर कॉज के लिए बात कर सके, उसका इमेजिन करना कि वो होगा, कैसे होगा?
नहीं, इसमें तो thousands of organizations will be involved. इसमें अलग अलग identities, whether they are कम्युनल आइडेंटिटीज़, सांप्रदायिक आइडेंटिटीज़, उनकी रिप्रेजेंटेशन जो है, जैसे कश्मीरी पंडित हैं, कश्मीरी पंडितों की ऑर्गेनाइजेशंस हो सकती हैं बहुत सारी अलग अलग, उसमें भी विद इन दैट देयर कुड बी अ लॉट ऑफ प्लूरैलिटी, बट these organizations which represents a group and a certain point of view, they should be in constant dialogue with the Indian state, and the Indian state, it's the job of the Indian state as a civilization state, if it is so, to facilitate these conversations. That is the job of as a civilizational state. You can't have an umbrella organization because this is an extremely diverse and a very mind-boggling diversity as देश में. और and if you
मतलब I was about to jump on to question कि क्या शंकराचार्य की अथॉरिटी रहेगी, बट
नहीं, शंकराचार्य की जो अथॉरिटी थी वो रहेगी जैसी थी, जो जब ये शंकर संप्रदाय है आदि शंकराचार्य के आगे आने के बाद जो उस इंस्टीट्यूशन की अथॉरिटी थी वो अभी तक सर्वाइव इसीलिए कर रहा है क्योंकि उसकी अथॉरिटी थी, बिकॉज इट वाज वैल्यूएबल एंड इट वाज सपोर्टेड. दैट इज व्हाई इट हैज सर्वाइव्ड. So it will continue that way. It need not be
the final
applicable
word,
to final word for their own
people. Yeah.
But इसमें ना एक there is an important distinction that people forget, which is that these normative sampradayas, whether they are Vaishnavacharyas, Shankaracharyas, right? There are certain sects which are experts on dharmashastras. And their expertise on dharmashastras is largely binding universally. So there may be discussions between two acharyas, but मैं किसी शंकराचार्य से डिस्कस नहीं कर सकता क्योंकि मेरे पास अथॉरिटी नहीं है. So that is a distinction, that is a nuance that no one recognizes right now. But in terms of traditionally, if you look at the sectarian debates and the polemics between so many schools, even within the Vedantic schools. I'm not even going to other कि न्यायिका और वैशेषिका में क्या हो रहा था और etc. मैं तो केवल वेदांतिक स्कूल्स की बात कर रहा हूँ. वेदांतिक स्कूल्स में इतना पोलेमिकल आर्ग्यूमेंटेशन है आपस में, उसमें भी there is hardly any conflict on dharmashastras. Everyone recognizes Manusmriti. Everyone recognizes that the dharmashastras are the code, the right code of conduct. Because there is no confusion there. The debate is on esoteric aspects, whether the creator और ईश्वर का क्या रोल है, और क्या ये रियलिटी अद्वैत है या द्वैत है या विशिष्ट अद्वैत है या द्वैताद्वैत है या एटसेट्रा है या क्या है, या देवी सुप्रीम है और बाकी सब उनको पूजते हैं, या देवी विष्णु जी के पांव दबा रही हैं, वैष्णव व्यू वो है. सो दीज आर ऑल religious, hardcore, theological, esoteric debates which have no end. And every sect has its own position and they are right in their own way. But when it comes to how society is organized, hardly any debate. There is everyone agree because there is no confusion there. एक शिष्टाचार क्या होना चाहिए, इसमें क्या कंफ्यूजन होगा?
नहीं, तो ये क्लियर है कि आइडियल सोसाइटी के अंदर ऐसा होना चाहिए. अब बस ये डिफाइन करना है और समझना है समाज, ये अथॉरिटी वाले लोग ये आपस में
करेक्ट बिकॉज दीज आर नाउ मॉडर्न इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं. देयर लाइक फॉर एग्जांपल मीडिया है, तो मीडिया का इफ यू से आज हम अभी जो हम बात कर रहे थे, आई विल गिव यू अ कॉन्क्रीट एग्जांपल. अभी हम बात कर रहे थे कि वॉर में आप जब कमेंट्री देखते हो, जब ऑपरेशन सिंदूर हो रहा था, तो द मोस्ट मेन स्ट्रीम चैनल्स like Z, India TV, ये वो जो भी mainstream news channels हैं, they had declared that Karachi port is destroyed and Islamabad capture हो गया और ये हो गया. I have seen it with my own eyes. This is the kind of credibility that they have, right? So media is totally unhinged. कल को अगर बड़ा war हो जाए तो हमें पता नहीं होगा कि क्या हो रहा है.
इसी के अंदर एक आर्गुमेंट ये भी तो आता है ना कि धर्म रिक्वायर क्या करता है उस दौर में जब ये युद्ध चल रहा है, मोरल बूस्ट करके रखना है लोगों को या सच बताना लोगों को?
नहीं, मोरल बूस्ट करने की बात नहीं है. मोरल बूस्ट तब भी हो सकता है ना जब आप ये बोल रहे हो कि हाँ हमने जो सेना है, सेना के साथ बात हुई, उन्होंने कहा कि हम ऐसा करेंगे वैसा करेंगे. झूठ तो नहीं बोलोगे ना, सफेद झूठ तो कहीं नहीं बोला जाता ना, वो तो आउट एंड आउट प्रोपेगेंडा है ना. तो वो आपको झूठ बोलने की जरूरत नहीं है, आप सच छुपा सकते हो. बट ये भी डिबेट जो हम अभी ये भी डिबेट हम कर रहे हैं, वो ये बात कर रहे हैं कि मीडिया की मोरालिटी क्या होनी चाहिए. तो मीडिया इज अ मॉडर्न इंस्टीट्यूशन, यू हैव अ सर्टेन धर्मशास्त्रिक व्यू. अब इन दोनों को आप कैसे how do you apply this lens to the media and say कि उसकी guidelines ऐसी होनी चाहिए? This is a practical problem to solve. कर लो आप.
But as by being an absolute pleasure. अगली बार हम जाति पे भी, कास्ट पे भी, वर्ण पे भी, because I want this conversation to go on for hours, because कई सारी ऐसी बातें हैं जो इसी conversation से निकलती हैं और तभी समझी जाएंगी. At the end of the day, I also think कि these conversations are also part of the larger process.
Absolutely.
You never know कि ये message कहाँ पर जाए and कौन सा एक thought process है. Much like an academic,
Yeah.
कि अब कौन सी बात किसी स्टूडेंट को किस समय पे क्या बोल दे तो कौन सी बात उसके दिमाग में टिक जाती है. बट इट्स बीन एन एब्सोल्यूट प्लेजर. थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर टेकिंग आउट द टाइम. अगली बार जाति, सावरकर, यूजीसी
बिल्कुल
चर्चा करेंगे. पर तब तक है ना.
No, pleasure to be here, and it was equally enlightening for me also, क्योंकि जिस प्रकार के सवाल आपने पूछे और जो आपका पुशबैक था उससे मुझे भी सीखने को बहुत कुछ मिला. And I am very grateful that you called me, and I look forward to more conversations.